The panel of Loki's lightning striking the Adam tree is scarily similar to the lightning hitting the tree on the ancient mural. That is quite correct, and I suspect that this is very much on purpose. In the Elbaf mural, you can see a lightning bolt coming from what appears to be an Arc Maxim-like vessel that's also suspected to maybe represent Uranus, but it's pretty undeniable that this mural is starting to come to life. We have a Nika, we have a Loki, we have other assorted shadowy nightmare creatures, and more importantly, it all seems like it's coming to life because all the creatures were conjured by the imagination of children, just like how this mural was drawn by a child. So what Elbaf could be building towards is staging a trial run for the final war of One Piece, like a budget community theater production of a full-scale commercial musical to come. Since Loki says if you want Elbaf to be safe, remove the second shackle as well, this leads me to believe that he knows what's going on upstairs and strikes the Adam tree to try and stop some of the monsters. Alright, so I am keen to find out what his actual wording will be in the official translation, but the way the current translation sounds does support that idea. Maybe not that he's deliberately striking someone upstairs, but that Loki isn't threatening to destroy Elbaf if he isn't released, but that he knows that Elbaf can't be saved unless he's released. And what also supports this is that Loki is one of the few people on the island who actually knows that the Holy Knights are present, although that would bring up the question of, well, why not just tell Luffy's group about them? Loki knows why they're here and to some degree what they plan on doing, although I don't even know if that logic works, because in this case, if Loki did do that, if he told everyone exactly what he saw in a painful amount of detail, then even Haradin probably wouldn't believe him. Because Loki and Liar, they're just synonymous concepts at the moment. And Loki might know that, which is why he's not even bothering and taking a more blunt approach. Calling it now, Usopp will basically repeat what he did on Thriller Bark and be the only one to be unaffected by this fear ability. And the Giants will mistake it as him being a man without fear. It would be pretty fun to have another hard Usopp counter. I don't think he'd be unaffected though. There's a big difference between fear and negativity. And that would seem a lot more like a Buggy kind of path to go down, where things work out in his favor to conjure a believable lie like, oh, Captain Buggy is such a magnificent man clown that he has no fear. Usopp is very different though. He's a character who needs a bit more substance, a bit more nuance, especially in this area, because being brave, that is his whole thing. That is his entire series arc. And you can't be brave without fear. So what might happen is, if Usopp was targeted, then what we see are that his fears are so great and numerous that it may overload the system. Usopp's imagination is so powerful that it turns every conceivable thing into a fear that engulfs the Holy Knights. And then everyone else, after seeing how much fear Usopp has and how after all of that he's willing to stand up regardless, then that to me would feel like a solid demonstration of true bravery. To literally see what Usopp's mentality is dealing with at all times. And it also opens up the potential of getting to explore the rest of the Straw Hats a bit as well. It'd be really cool to have them all fall under this ability and see what each individual member is afraid of. So maybe Nami conjures a massive Arlong, Frankie could conjure his battle Frankies and see his ships attacking innocent people, and then what Zoro sees is just a basic set of stairs, the ultimate counter to any swordsman. But the most interesting character to see by far would be Luffy. He doesn't have a whole lot of fear, and it might be something as simple as conjuring an empty fridge, or something even more Luffy-like would be for him to make friends with some of the nightmare creatures, to tame Fenrir, or even team up with Nightmare Loki. Because Luffy almost never interacts with anything as it's designed, he's quite unique like that. But I'm not sure if we'll get to see many, if any, adult fears though, because it would kind of break the theme that we're going for here with the childlike imagination and conjuration. And at the moment, I do quite like the idea of adults needing to face and quell the fears of children, much like any parent has to, just much more literally in this case. This also isn't anywhere near confirmed, but my assumption would be that whatever is conjured would disappear if the child was to wake up, which is why we're going to such extremes to keep them asleep. Something I didn't mention in the previous video was what happened with I believe it's the PE teacher, Mr. Wolf. He gave Soul a warning not to touch the children, which doubles as good advice for people in general. But attempting to physically snap them out of their trance does seem to have physical consequences. So the only way I can currently see out of this is to beat the Holy Knight, or Holy Knights plural, who are responsible, and do the typical devil fruit magic of knocking a user unconscious to deactivate their powers. Man on the internet, did you know that the girl named Ylva is named after Vicky the Viking's mum? She is definitely somebody to keep an eye on. I did not, but that makes a lot of sense, and this isn't her first feature either. She's had a fairly primary speaking role in previous chapters as well. But in this case, Ylva is the girl in the front of this panel, and she has a very Vicky the Viking inspired helmet, just as Colin does, and not all of the kids or even all of the adults have these. In fact, most don't. So this is a very nice little nod to Oda's inspiration for the name of the character at the very least. And I don't know if this is going to be relevant at all, but the fear that Ylva drew was Fenrir the wolf. Although something I'd be quite interested in would be seeing Colin's fear, because as a brave warrior boy, I imagine that he doesn't have the same fears that the other kids at the walrus school have. I mean, I say other kids, Colin, he's 20 years old, but I think that all of these kids are about 20 years old because they were making fun of Colin like he's their peer. And one of the things they yelled is that Colin doesn't even go to school. So I am pretty sure that all of these giant kids are older than a good chunk of people watching this video right now. Could Gunko secretly be Emu? She has similar arrow powers and said Nika was her worst fear. Alright, we've covered the arrow ability thing before, so put that to one side. However, the fear of Nika, that is very interesting. Because I do think it's quite natural for all world nobles to be afraid of Nika, even though Gunko, I don't think is one. Not just because Nika, the sun god, the warrior of liberation, threatens to dismantle their stranglehold on the planet, but because the idea of Nika the destroyer does exist. And I love that in this chapter we have two characters state a fear towards Nika. One is an innocent child of Elbaf, and the other is a very not innocent member of the Holy Knights. I try to take the Vegapunk approach to this thought, which is to not assume who was right and who was wrong. So with that in mind, there is a world out there where the 20 kingdoms may have had a justified reason to be afraid of Nika during the Void Century. And that fear is what led to the formation of the world government. In our modern history of the One Piece world, the Nika legend is mostly passed down as the joyous warrior of liberation, but back 800 to 900 years ago, the prevalent legend could have been the destroyer. And the world government may have seen their actions during the Void Century as quite just to protect the world, which includes wiping away all traces of the Great Kingdom and the ancient language out of the pure fear that it could be used to resurrect Nika. And when it comes to Gunko herself, I'm not sold on the secret Emu theory, or being a satellite of Emu, although I do prefer that idea. But in that last panel where she states that she fears Nika, I don't know how Oda does this, but I swear I can see that fear in her eyes. Gunko probably doesn't view herself as an antagonist. She doesn't seem to be an overly indulgent prick-style bad guy who does bad things and knows that they're bad, and that's why she does them, because she likes the bad. I don't get that from her. At the moment, the vibe I get is that Gunko believes she is doing what's best for the world. It's just a very twisted belief. I could end up being extremely wrong about that, but right now there's a distinct air of honesty around her that you don't often find with the residents of Marijois. And Gunko does seem like someone who believes in structure. She definitely has great concern for maintaining the hierarchy of the world, in which case even the idea of liberation would be terrifying, because freeing people from wherever they are in that hierarchy would create anarchy and chaos. But this does set up the surely inevitable moment where Gunko sees Luffy in Gear 5th, and I very much look forward to seeing how she deals with that. To see how terrified she becomes in the presence of Luffy and how Gunko handles that fear, the same way that the kids and the giants have to handle their fears. I guess it's either that or Gunko makes the NL face and it gets played for comedy. But speaking of NL, was NL not a god? Where's his Haki? So this is referring to my comments about Loki having Conqueror's Haki, obviously because of his belief that he is a god and his ambition to destroy the world. And to be fair, this is my bad. I should have expanded more on what I meant by that, because with just that alone, NL does also fit that description. But it's not just the belief, it's about the will and execution to fight for that belief. As NL was definitely more on the world noble spectrum of claiming to be a god. He 100% believed that he was a god, but he's not someone whose willpower ever had to be tested. And perhaps he does have Conqueror's Haki deep down, but it's never bloomed due to not being properly tested. I'm personally not convinced by the explanation that Conqueror's Haki is a genetic trait that you either do or don't have. I just think it takes an exceptional individual driven enough to tap into it. Because if you look at the list of known Conqueror's Haki users, none of them were particularly gifted by life. Most of them suffered pretty tremendously and endured without their dreams or willpower being broken. Whereas if you're born as a world noble, yes, you do have the mentality of a conqueror and or god, but you're never put in a position where you have to exercise the willpower of that belief. It's the system around you that facilitates that delusion and nothing that you actually need to do for yourself. And that's a situation I think NL found himself in when he ate his devil fruit. He was gifted so much power that he never really had to fight for anything. The only real challenge he's had in his life was up against Luffy, and that it was a weird fight. There wasn't actually much fighting at all, so Enel didn't really have an opportunity for evolution. But bringing this back around to Loki, he grew up in Warland, and so he possesses a very dangerous combination of belief that he is a god and having grown up being constantly tested in battle probably ever since he was able to walk, which also isn't too dissimilar from how Garp decided to raise Luffy. As soon as Luffy could walk, Garp threw him into a series of potentially deadly tests so that Luffy would endure and grow. And so it's no wonder that Luffy gets along so well with the giants of Elbaf, because Luffy's childhood was quite similar to growing up in Warland. Logia is my favorite type of fruit. What kind of Logia would you like to see in this arc or upcoming arcs? Love your stuff. What I would love to see is a wind Logia. We still haven't had that, although it's a very popular idea to claim that Dragon could have a wind Logia, which does very much fit the wind motif. Lots of videos on that on this channel. But the other one I'd love to see, I think, is a bit more morbid, and it's the idea of a blood Logia. Or if it's out there, just a simple water Logia. It's not supposed to be possible because that's a substance that directly counters devil fruits, sea god getting angry and everything. But surely someone out there was imaginative enough to make it work when these fruits were being cranked out. I'm calling it now. Ange is a spy, or even one of the Holy Knights. I believe she had the kids draw those things as fuel for whichever Holy Knight's ability brought them to life. Oh, mate, not Ange, of all people. And look, it does seem like a really odd exercise. All right, children, today we're going to train our imaginations by drawing the scariest possible thing that you can think of, to the point where it's going to give Ylva nightmares, and I, Ange, do not care. And the fact that it happened just today as well, it is such insanely tight timing. So sharp that even Ange saying, I remember them at the end of the chapter is a bit weird. Because it's like, of course you remember. You just did it. This didn't happen yesterday or a week ago. And I've got to admit that it is very convenient timing. But I would also warn that we as readers have been trained to look for traitors in every arc now. Kanjuro on Wano and York on Egghead Island have scarred us to the point where a lot of readers now expect betrayal as a default element, and so are actively looking for the next traitor. And I myself am quite guilty of this in relation to my ideas about Jarl. As fun as he is, I never feel 100% comfortable around him. And if I was to bet some cold, hard, but numerically weak Australian dollars, then I would bet that there is a traitor on Elbaf, or that there was a traitor on Elbaf if it was King Harold. Because we do still have the mystery of why the Abyss Circle was in the throne room, and also why it was suggested that Shamrock would visit Harold's grave. And even this chapter showing that Gunko and some of Elbaf have the same fear about Nika. So there could be a whole sector of giant society that has a lot more in common with the world nobles due to that fear of Nika. And Ange could be one of them. But I do have a lot of trouble seeing her as a traitor right now. Look, even with the extremely convenient timing of the fear exercise, it's a weird thing to do. So I guess she could have seen Shamrock and Gunko flying over and taken that as a signal. All right, kids, draw your fears quickly. But I'm gonna need a bit more before I start going in too hard on Ange though. What if a weakness to the nightmare creatures is facing your fears? Imagine the Elbaf kids seeing Luffy as Nika bouncing, acting goofy, and fighting to protect them, making the nightmare Nika go away. That does feel like a very one-piece solution, and it's also exactly what Nika is said to do, to spread joy and laughter and all of the good feeling things. Which works especially well with children because Luffy using Gear 5th is basically a living cartoon. There's no other demographic in this world that Luffy should be more effective with than children. So if Luffy can fight the nightmares and make them look like a joke, much like he did with Kaido, then that would show that there is nothing to be afraid of. And it might make the creatures disappear, or it might pacify them and turn them into very friendly creatures. It may also not be exclusive to creating nightmares. It's just that the kids were primed for that due to school that day. For example, if Jewelry Bonnie was to be caught in this ability in her current state of finally having attained freedom and not being afraid anymore, then her dreams could create a heroic Bartholomew Kuma to help protect all the kids. There's a lot of potential here, particularly if it's a more general dream ability rather than something specifically negative. And if it was a general dream ability, then we could have a really touching moment where it's actually up to the children of Elbaf to save the day. For them to use their imaginations like how Luffy uses his and how Bonnie used hers to create a legion of peaceful, wonderful creatures that help us fight back against the Holy Knights. But the challenge here is how you influence the mood of the kids while they're asleep. Until we can breach that barrier, which might be the result of St. Summers, we can't really have that conversation. It's a very hard-hitting move though. At first I thought that it was, quite standard world noble pettiness to target children, but it is so much larger than that. Because if you eradicate all of the children from a civilization, then you have just erased its future. Elbaf goes extinct. Mr. Internet Man, did we ever find out just what Smoker was transporting with that motorbike of his? Not yet, but I'm sure that it was something worth not appearing in the series at all for 9 years. That's how long it was between Smoker appearances. So this package better have been worth the 9 years of delivery time it took. Out of curiosity, do you have the statistics on percentage of viewers per country? I'm a Brazilian guy watching you from Canada, so I imagine you're pretty global at this point, and that's pretty cool. Keep up the great work. Mate, I have statistics on everything. YouTube really overloads you with information to the point where it becomes difficult to process. But the top 5 countries that watch this channel are overwhelmingly the United States in first place with over 40% of all viewers, followed by India, the UK, Germany, and Canada, all somewhere in the 5 to 6% mark. As for Brazil, surprisingly, that is this channel's 9th most viewed country. I don't know who from Brazil is watching me, apart from this guy, but last month, apparently there were over 50,000 unique viewers from Brazil, so I greatly appreciate that. And for anyone curious about completing the top 10, we have Australia, the Philippines, the Netherlands, and Sweden. Although in the spot of shame, I must say that the least viewed country on this channel is Croatia. So come on, Croatians, let's get our shit together. Have you noticed that there's a switch here? Normally arcs end in a celebration after liberating an island, but here the arc began with a celebration and what follows is destruction. That's true, we have kind of flipped things on Elbaf. Usually the big party does happen at the end, but also the big lore drops tend to happen at the end as well. It generally takes beating the main antagonist until the Straw Hat sees something like the mural on Elbaf, which is our lore reward for completing whatever mission we had on the island. And if this is the trajectory, then things are not looking good for Elbaf. Because if we keep going backwards, then Elbaf is set to end in the way that we find most islands in at the beginning, under a tyrannical and not at all fun rule. It'd be a bold way to end an arc, one of the only islands where the Straw Hats are welcomed and it results in complete destruction, which I guess very much in line with the prophecy of the Sun God. And actually, come to think of it, is exactly what happened with Egghead Island. Luffy the Sun God arrived and it was destroyed. So let's hope that Elbaf has a more merciful future again, but also Ragnarok does tend to be a bit of a world-ending event.